So have you heard of The Secret Garden? It's by Frances Hodgson Burnett,
Oh, sure.
and it's a classic, but a lot of people are wondering if it's actually worth reading these days.
Right.
We've got tons of information reviews, analyses, the whole 9 yards to help you decide.
Okay.
And let me tell you, there are some seriously strong opinions out there. But to get straight to the point, is this book a must-read?
For certain readers, I would say absolutely yes. But there are a few caveats. It's one of those books that really hits home for anyone looking for a heartwarming story, like a classic kind of feel,
Yeah.
and also one where nature's healing power is kind of front and center.
Okay, so it's got that feel-good thing going for it.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's maybe not for everyone.
Right.
Can you help me out with who exactly this book is really perfect for?
I think it's perfect for someone who loves those classic children's stories with a little bit of magic and a little dash of personal growth. They're looking for a story with beautiful imagery and a heartwarming message. That's kind of the sweet spot for The Secret Garden.
So not a thriller,
No,
more like a cozy by the fire kind of read.
exactly.
What about the writing itself, though? Does it hold up? Because some of those classics can feel a bit, dusty.
Yeah, Burnett's writing is really interesting. Actually, a lot of people praise it because even when she's describing something as simple as gardening, she manages to make it feel kind of enchanting. I think one reviewer even said that her descriptions made them want to grab a shovel and start digging.
Wow. Okay, so that's pretty vivid. I can see how that would pull you in. But I gotta admit, with these older books, I always wonder about the characters.
Sure.
Are they relatable? Or are they just stuck in the past?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's where things get a little bit interesting with this book. Mary and Colin, they're the two main children, are actually pretty unlikable at the start. They're products of neglect, and they come across as spoiled and demanding.
Oh, so they're not those perfectly sweet kids that you sometimes find in those old stories.
No, not at all. And that's actually what makes their journeys so compelling because they go through these incredible transformations. They learn about compassion. They learn about self-reliance. And they really kind of blossom alongside the garden itself.
I like that. Okay, so can you give me an example of how that plays out?
Yeah, so one Goodreads review pointed out how Mary, in the beginning, treats the servants in India terribly. She's demanding and unkind because, she's a product of her privileged upbringing.
Right.
But then through her time in the garden and, interacting with the other characters, she really starts to see beyond herself.
Yeah.
And she starts to develop some empathy.
Okay.
It's not a sudden change or anything, but it's really powerful to see how it unfolds.
So it sounds like Burnett doesn't shy away from showing their flaws,
Right.
which then makes their growth feel more genuine and less like, fairy tale-ish.
Exactly.
But this whole idea of the healing power of nature,
Yeah.
I gotta be honest, sometimes I'm a bit cynical about that.
Sure.
Can a garden really have that much of an impact?
It's totally understandable to be skeptical. But think about it kind of symbolically for a second. Because gardens require care and patience and attention. And as you nurture a garden, you're also kind of nurturing yourself.
Right.
It becomes this reflection of your own personal growth.
Okay, I can see that. So it's not really just about plants, it's about personal development too.
Uh-huh.
Almost like a form of self-care, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty relatable.
Exactly. And this connection between nature and healing, it's a pretty common thread that you see in literature.
Okay.
One reviewer actually even compared The Secret Garden to Heidi.
Oh, interesting.
And
Yes.
specifically mentioned how Colin from The Secret Garden and then Clara, who is the sickly girl from Heidi, they both spend a lot of time confined indoors
Right.
and find this incredible strength and healing through being exposed to nature.
That's true. Heidi. I haven't read that one in years, but I remember that. So both books kind of tap into that same theme. It's a pretty universal idea. But, I remember hearing some criticism about The Secret Garden too.
Yeah.
Does that have something to do with this nature theme, or is it something else entirely?
It's definitely separate. So while a lot of people celebrate the book's positive messages, some people do criticize its portrayal of colonialism and ableism.
Okay.
So, for example, one reviewer pointed out that even though Mary does grow as a character, the book never really addresses her initial, racist views toward the people of India.
It's true. It's hard to ignore those aspects, especially when you're looking at it from a modern perspective.
Right.
Really makes you think about how much societal values have changed and how that can influence how we interpret these classic books.
For sure. It's a really complex issue, but it's definitely something to be aware of as a reader.
Okay, so to sum up what we've talked about so far, The writing is really engaging. Character development is strong. This theme of nature's healing power is really central to the story. But we do have to acknowledge that there might be some outdated views in there.
Yes.
This is actually reminding me of another classic, A Little Princess, also by Burnett. I read that one years ago and I loved it. Are there any connections there?
Oh, totally. You're
Yeah.
spot on. The Secret Garden and A Little Princess, they share these really similar themes of resilience and transformation.
So if someone loved The Little Princess, they'd probably like The Secret Garden too.
Yeah, there's a good chance.
That's helpful. I'm also a big fan of Jane Eyre, and I saw that one reviewer actually compared The Secret Garden to that.
Really?
Yeah, and that I did not see coming. How do those two even connect?
It's a pretty interesting parallel, though I'll admit it might not be super obvious at first. The reviewer described Mr. Craven, Colin's father, as like an asexual Rochester.
Okay, asexual Rochester. That definitely needs some explaining. For those of us who haven't read Bronte lately, what's the connection?
Basically, both Mr. Craven and Mr. Rochester are these brooding, emotionally distant figures who are shaped by past tragedies.
Right.
They isolate themselves and they really struggle to connect with other people.
Okay.
And then in both of these books, the arrival of a spirited young woman, like Jane and Jane Eyre and Marrying the Secret Garden, they both kind of disrupt that isolation and force them to confront their emotional baggage.
Oh, wow. That's a really insightful connection. It's amazing how these classic works can echo each other in ways that you just don't expect. It makes me want to reread both of those and see if I can pick up on those parallels. All right, so we talked about the writing, the characters, the themes, even how it compares to other books, but what's the bottom line here? Is The Secret Garden actually worth putting on my reading list?
I would say yes. The Secret Garden offers a really beautiful story with a timeless message about the power of nature and personal growth. And it's heartwarming, thought-provoking, and the writing is just so enchanting.
That sounds promising.
Yeah.
But I got to be honest with you, I'm not always drawn to classics. Would this one still appeal to like a modern reader like me? Because honestly, the language in some of these older books can be a real barrier.
I totally get it. And yeah, the language might feel a little old-fashioned sometimes, but the story itself and the characters are super relatable. They're dealing with these universal themes of loneliness and loss and trying to find your place in the world. I think at its core, The Secret Garden is really a story about hope and second chances. And those are themes that I think resonate no matter when you're reading it.
Yeah, okay. You've given me a lot to think about. It seems like there's a lot of depth to this book,
There is.
but it's also approachable.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
not just some stuffy old classic gathering dust on a shelf.
It's not stuffy at all. It's a
Huh.
book that can be enjoyed on a lot of different levels. It's a charming story, a coming-of-age tale, and this beautiful exploration of nature's ability to heal. And like we talked about before, it can even spark some deeper conversations about these bigger social issues and how perspectives have changed over time.
I mean, that's what I love about a good book. It gives you something to think about long after you finished it. But I'm still kind of stuck on those criticisms that we mentioned.
Yeah.
You mentioned colonialism and ableism. How did those actually show up in the story?
So one of the big examples is how Mary initially interacts with the people of India.
Uh-huh.
She basically sees them as inferior, and she makes these huge generalizations based on her limited experience.
Right.
And while her character does grow in other ways, the book never really confronts or challenges those racist views. And that lack of resolution can feel kind of jarring to modern readers, especially those who are sensitive to the issues of representation and social justice.
It makes sense. It reminds us that even these classic, beloved books can sometimes reflect these outdated social norms.
Yeah.
What about ableism? How does that play out?
Colin's character, who is initially presented as physically weak and emotionally fragile, has this kind of miraculous recovery thanks to his time in the garden.
Yeah.
Now, some people might see that as a symbol of hope and the power of positive thinking, but other readers could see it as a simplistic, maybe even harmful portrayal of disability,
Right.
because it kind of reinforces that idea that disability can just be overcome with willpower, which is not always the case.
Yeah. So it's not just about whether or not the book is enjoyable to read. It's also about the messages
Yeah.
that it might be sending, intentionally or not. It sounds like The Secret Garden is one of those books that requires a little bit of critical thinking and a willingness to kind of engage with the more complex parts of it.
Exactly. I think it's a book that invites us to think critically, to really acknowledge both its strengths and its limitations, and then ultimately find our own personal connection to the story. And honestly, that's part of what makes it so fascinating because it gets these conversations going and it makes us examine our own perspectives.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I
Yeah.
have to say, you've presented a really nuanced picture of The Secret Garden. It's not just some simple children's story, but
Right, right.
it's this work with so many layers of meaning that can be interpreted in different ways. I think our listeners have a lot to think about right now. So to bring this back to their initial question, is The Secret Garden worth their time?
Hmm.
What would you say are the strongest arguments in its favor?
I think the strongest argument is that it's ultimately a story about transformation and hope. It reminds us that nature has this power to heal and that human connection is so important. And it shows us that even the most unlikable characters can find redemption. And beyond that, it's just beautifully written. Burnett's prose is captivating, and she creates this world that feels both magical and real at the same time.
Yeah, I can picture it now. You've piqued my interest. I might have to go back and read The Secret Garden again myself.
Yeah.
But before I get carried away, what's the one key takeaway that you want our listener to remember?
I really want them to remember that The Secret Garden, like all great literature, is open to interpretation. It's a book that can be enjoyed on so many different levels, and its meaning can change and evolve depending on the reader's own experiences and perspectives. It asks us to think critically, really engage with its themes, and then ultimately find our own connection to its story.
Yeah, it really does sound like there's just so much to think about with this book, even beyond just the surface level of the story.
Yeah.
That's what makes a good book so rewarding.
Right. And, it really makes you think that these classics like The Secret Garden can still be so relevant to modern readers, and they can spark new insights and interpretations, like with each generation that reads them.
Like that Secret Garden itself, right?
Yeah.
There's always something new to discover, even if you've already been there before.
Exactly. And speaking of discovery, there's one final thought that I wanted to leave with our listeners today.
Oh, I'm all ears.
Think about how this one single book, The Secret Garden, has managed to create so many different reactions and interpretations. It's really a testament to how powerful literature can be. How it connects with readers across different generations, even though each reader brings their own unique perspective to the table.
That is a great point. It just shows you that reading isn't just about like consuming words on a page.
Uh-huh.
It's about really engaging with the ideas in the book and connecting with something that's bigger than ourselves.
Right.
It sounds like The Secret Garden offers just a really rich and layered journey for anyone who reads it.
Oh, yeah. And just like Mary and Colin, who discovered this transformative power in that hidden garden, maybe our deep dive today has inspired you to unearth your own literary gems.
Ooh.
Maybe even revisit some old favorites with a new perspective, or just simply, embrace the joy of getting lost in a good book.
Yeah, I love that. That was beautifully said. And with that, we want to thank you so much for joining us today on this deep dive into The Secret Garden. Hopefully you found it insightful, engaging, and maybe even a little bit magical.
It was my pleasure. Happy reading.
And for everyone listening out there, just keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep those deep dives going.